Dalai Lama reminds all the Tibetans, those inside Tibet, in occupied Tibet, but also in exile, to remain hopeful, because he reminds his people that tyranny does not last forever. That's number one. But he also urges Tibetans to remain united, to focus on culture, language, and being there for
the Dalai Lama means something beyond China, beyond Tibet. He reaches to young people in China, he reaches to young people across the world. So the significance of this moment goes beyond Sino-Tibetan relations.
Hello, I'm Professor Dibyesh Anand from University of Westminster. Today we had a panel discussion on the Dalai Lama's most recent book, which is The Voice for the Voiceless. So the panel included Isabel Hilton, Tenzin Choki, and we were introduced by Professor Natasha Kaul, who's a colleague of ours at University of Westminster, Director of Center for the Study of Democracy, and this was done in collaboration with Tibet Watch. The key message we got from the book, and this is my view of course, is in terms of hope for Tibetans. So the Dalai Lama reminds all the Tibetans, those inside Tibet, in occupied Tibet, but also in exile, to remain hopeful, because he reminds his people that tyranny does not last forever. That's number one. But he also urges Tibetans to remain united, to focus on culture, language, and being there for each other. He also expresses gratitude towards his host country, India, in this context. But he also expresses gratitude towards supporters around the world. But his other message is about what he calls Chinese brothers and sisters. And this is very unique. Usually, a leader who has been exiled for decades with very little hope of going back to the homeland would turn out to be bitter. But that's not the Dalai Lama. Those of us who know about the Dalai Lama, have read his work, or have had the fortune of meeting him, in my case, for instance, when we hosted him at the University of Westminster in 2012, we know that he's never driven by bitterness, he's always driven by compassion. So he reminds Chinese people that the key focus, of course, has to be on shared humanity between Tibetans and Chinese and the rest of the world, and therefore focus on finding a resolution based on respect, meaningful autonomy, genuine autonomy, and working together. That's the key message we got from the book.
So this book comes at a very important time when there's a heightened global focus on the Tibet issue and on the Dalai Lama personally as he approaches his 90th birthday. And when you think of the scope and the expanse of the Dalai Lama's life, this is a unique leader on the global stage. He's someone who went from meeting Chinese leaders in the 1950s, the Maoist leaders of the revolution, as a teenager. And then he went on to, from the 1970s onwards, to meet many of the, he met almost every sitting president in the White House from when he started visiting America from 1979. He hasn't met Trump, the current incumbent. And he's met prime ministers, popes, all over the world. He's reshaped his role on the world stage. He's become a secular, a very important secular leader as well as a spiritual leader. He has developed new educational initiatives. He's one of the only religious leaders I can think of who doesn't advocate conversion to Buddhism, to his religion, but he urges us all to go beyond religion and to adopt a secular ethics and a universal responsibility. And it was also for his advocacy of the Buddhist concept of interdependence that was one of the reasons why he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So when you look at the scope of his life, how he's reshaped his world, his role, and also what he means to Tibetans, which is almost impossible to convey, the book is quite a concise, a short summary of not only a life, but also a position. And I think he's speaking in the book, first and foremost, not to us as Westerners, as English speakers, but although, of course, to produce such a book in English guarantees an international audience, but I think he's first and foremost addressing Tibetan people And while over the decades he has been traveling all over the world, speaking about so many different things, engaged in dialogue with scientists, with scholars, about topics such as quantum physics, cosmology, education, nevertheless, he underlines that the importance of his current commitments, he underlines the priority is Tibet and the Tibetan people. So I think that's very important. He's also addressing the Chinese people. And I think I sense that a further audience is the Chinese government, because he is at great pains to refocus our minds on the dialogue process that happened over the years and that eventually stalled, and to include in the appendices of the book the memorandum on genuine autonomy, so that his position can be very, very clearly understood, and so that there is no room for ambiguity in what he's trying to convey. And I think this gives us a sense that in his lifetime, given his global influence, his strength on a global stage, as well as in China, in Tibet, across the Himalayas, Nepal, Bhutan, Ladakh, and also other Buddhist countries, Japan, Vietnam, Mongolia, very important for Tibetan Buddhism. He also shows there, with his reach in Mongolia, how Buddhism has the potential to address the damages wrought by communism. And he's also shown that in other areas of the former Soviet Union, Kalmykia and Tuva and these different places in Central Asia. So he's given this hope in a resilient culture. He's shown that the Dalai Lama means something beyond China, beyond Tibet. He reaches to young people in China, he reaches to young people across the world. So the significance of this moment goes beyond Sino-Tibetan relations. And so he's conveying that negotiating position very clearly. He's also showing that right now the Tibetans do have some strategic leverage in a changed, in a transformed world.
Of course, in the book, Dalai Lama records his engagement with different Chinese leaders, starting from Mao in 1950s. And he emphasizes that at different stages, there was sometimes offer from Chinese government, something called negotiation without any precondition. And he did participate. So Dalai Lama and Tibetans participated in negotiations with very much sincerity. But what he found, and Dalai Lama found, was, of course, that the sincerity was not always reciprocated from the side of Chinese government. So what he does, of course, in this book is reminds Chinese leaders that it is in their self-interest to provide autonomy to Tibetans. It is also in the self-interest to resolve this issue while he is still around. And he reminds all of them that this is not only about land and people, it is also about making sure that China is a strong country, and China can only be a strong country if they respect the rights and the autonomy of all population. So he asks for renewal of negotiation with Chinese government.
Meeting of religious leaders, the heads of all of the Buddhist schools, is that they will likely assert or make a resolution that they would like to request His Holiness to return as a bodhisattva, as is the process for someone who cares about the world's suffering. This is a deeply rooted part of Tibetan Buddhism. But the Dalai Lama has also achieved something that no Dalai Lama has ever achieved before. Even while Tibetan Buddhism has always reached beyond its borders, it's always transcended its borders with its force and its power. But this Dalai Lama has brought something very new and has created a whole new global platform for these important cultural core values. Another important element in his book is that the Dalai Lama makes Tibet's strategic significance very clear. And Tibet's geopolitical relevance has often been overlooked. Western governments have often seen Tibet as a matter solely of human rights and of religious freedom. But the Dalai Lama shows in his book how important it is as a border, as a strategic border. There was no contiguous border between India and China until Tibet was invaded in 1949-50. He also makes it clear the importance of Tibet's environment as a source of Asia's major rivers and the consequences downstream of China controlling Tibet's waters. So all of these different factors are expressed very clearly in the book, which lend weight to his argument that Tibet matters, the Dalai Lama institution matters and is of global relevance, not only to the Chinese and to the Tibetan people. And as such, this perhaps demands international governments to develop a new form of multilateral strategies to deal with what is to come and to support the Tibetan people and their agency. For instance, the Tibetan exiles in the diaspora are increasingly vulnerable to China's transnational repression, because just as Dalai Lama's influence has extended globally, so China is seeking to engage in a counter-influence campaign. And this is here in London, as much as on a much more serious level, of course, places like India, like Nepal. Nepal has made a significant pivot to China. We recently saw this example of a highly respected Tibetan Buddhist Lama, Hongkar Dorje Rinpoche from Golok, who fled to Vietnam to find sanctuary in Vietnam after he came under persecution by China. And then in March, China announced his death. And it seems as though there was a joint security cooperation with the Vietnamese authorities and Chinese authorities. So this is a real escalation in China's transnational repression, and this has serious implications in security terms. Tibet has become a matter for governments of national security, not merely of human rights.